Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to WyomingPBS.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
Wyoming PBS is pleased to begin its 14th season of Capital Outlook from Cheyenne with our annual sit-down interview with Wyoming's governor. It's a wide-ranging conversation with Governor Mark Gordon. Capital Outlook starts now.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the BNSF Railway Foundation, dedicated to improving the general welfare and quality of life in communities throughout the BNSF Railway service area. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
By a grant from AARP, serving the needs and providing real possibilities for the over 50 population in Wyoming. AARP Wyoming. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
And by Wyoming Humanities, celebrating our heritage, strengthening our democracy, and growing Wyoming's creative and cultural economy for over 50 years. Visit thinkwy.org.
And as we begin our 14th season of Capital Outlook from here in Cheyenne, it's our privilege to be joined by the Governor of the state of Wyoming, Governor Mark Gordon. Mr. Governor, welcome.
Oh, it's nice to be here, and welcome to this refurbished room.
It's a beautiful room, and it's a room where women first earned the right to vote.
Yeah.
And it is beautiful. We're in the historic territorial and Supreme Court chambers here in the Capitol. And in fact, you've just moved back here to the Capitol just a couple months ago.
We did, and it's been wonderful. You know, working some of the bugs out, we still haven't got quite all the furniture in place, but I've had a couple of meetings in this room, and it's just an extraordinary room. And I'll be the first to admit that when you think about the 2 stories that are here and the fact that it used to be office space on both floors, but we took out some of that, it really has restored the glory of this room.
You're about to give your second State of the State address, your first back in this refurbished Capitol. But obviously this is a budget session that looms now in front of you with the legislature. And during your campaign, Governor, and I want to start with the budget first. You said that you wanted to work to ensuring that Wyoming has a balanced budget and that our government is living within its means, and that's absolutely essential. It means that we need to prioritize our needs versus wants. So the question is, did your budget do that?
I think for the most part, Craig, you know, I think I spoke during the campaign also about a glide path that, you know, bringing ourselves in. I am fond of quoting former Speaker Harold Hellbaum, who said, we're making more money than we can responsibly waste. And we certainly had some very sort of plush times, I guess you'd say. And now with revenues not catastrophically declining, but coming down a bit, it is time that we rein in some of our ambition and think about that. Now, luckily, I think we are beneficiaries of some really thoughtful thinking on our part of our forebears, the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, the LISRA, you know, things like that. They give us a little bit of latitude to be able to think about our future. That's what this budget tried to do. It stayed flat. There was some capital construction that I cut back on. Very few, very modest sort of increases in a couple of places. But really designed to give the state the breathing room to think about what is it we're going to do in our future.
We're going to talk about the huge challenge that is looming with education here in just a little bit, Governor.
Sure.
But I'm wondering, even between when you submitted your budget and January now, the update to the October 19 Craig report talks about almost $48 million less revenue than you thought you had when you constructed your budget. Would that have changed anything that you would have done?
No, we built the budget with a little bit of buffer in there, anticipating that revenues would go down. I mean, anybody who has looked at the year knows that we had 4 bankruptcies and coal companies. Oil prices have gone up, but not as much as maybe some might have expected. Gas prices have fallen dramatically.
A big reason for the difference from October to January.
Exactly.
How does that concern you? And we'll talk a lot more about the future of Wyoming's revenues with Power Wyoming and other things. But three nice solid pegs to the chair, oil, coal, and gas.
Right.
And now two of them really aren't there like you had wanted them to be, and one's volatile.
Well,
how do you plan?
that's the big challenge, and I think the quote that keeps coming back is, instead of a tricycle, we're going to be on a unicycle, and I think that should give everybody pause. As I said, I think we've put some buffer in. We had a rainy day account. We haven't been too profligate with that, and so I think it gives us again the chance to think about how we budget. A question I always raise during the campaign, still raise during this last year, is if we're going to cut government spending, where is it we're going to cut, and what's the impact going to be? And that's part of this Power Wyoming group.
We'll get to that, but I want to talk about that in context of education.
Yeah.
Now, and my question is that much of the education shortfall is funded out of the budget reserve accounts
Right.
that you talked about. One, is that good policy? Two, why weren't you more aggressive in this budget in dealing with that shortfall?
Well, one of the challenges with education is this old conversation about the Constitution requires that we fund education. That funding is based on the, quote, basket of goods. It goes back to 1979 or something like that.
The Campbell County decisions.
Yeah, and the Campbell County decisions that have come along and said, every student, under our Constitution, every student in Wyoming should be afforded, an equal education as best you can provide. So, this is something that legislatures wrestled with over and over and over again. Clearly, it's something we've got to address going forward. I think if you just sort of start lopping off appendages, pretty soon your body doesn't work. So I, again, am thinking it's important that what we do is take this year, when we have recalibration, perhaps go in and look at that basket of goods. It's been 30 years. The cell phones were not really invented at that time, and maybe it is time to look at that basket of goods.
You chose to fund the external cost adjustment for both years in the biennium. There's some thought maybe you should have just done one. You do have recalibration looking at you here. Why did you decide to fund both years?
Well, having been treasurer and having watched the legislature over the last several years, I don't think it's a benefit to the people of Wyoming when we're required to have a full biennium budget to sort of say, we'll get to it next year, we'll get to it next year. We really need to think a few years out ahead and start thinking about how we're going to make those adjustments.
You've said that the state has room to do a better job delivering education, Governor, and now that you've been in office for a year, what has that come to mean to you?
Well, as I say, I think part of it is we've had a long discussion this year. I just signed the computer science standards, the rules that came out. There was a lot of discussion about skills and how we need to have a skilled workforce, what that means. I keep running back to what is an educated, skilled workforce, not just a skilled workforce. And I think that occasions that conversation we just spoke about of looking at, again, in 1979, we said, what does it take to have a student life ready? And today, it's a different world, lots of different pressures, lots of different aspects to education, to life. What should we do educating our kids going forward from here?
It just seems to me like it's a big task. The things in the basket of goods you're talking about are language arts, career and vocational training, fine and performing arts, foreign language, health, education, mathematics, physical education, science, and social studies.
Yeah.
How can you par that? I mean, how do you begin to look at that and decide, is our basket smaller? Will that save us money? Or our classroom size larger? Will that save us money? How do you begin to attack that thought process?
Well, I think you start at the beginning again. I think you say, okay, what is it we want our kids to learn? And I think you begin to build out that conversation. I've looked at the Hathaway, for example. Initially it was about exceptional students and you earned the right to get the Hathaway Scholarship, and over time it's become sort of a proxy for what that basket of goods would be. It's had more and more expectations hung on it. It's made it more difficult for students to be able to get a full education. I think of our daughter in Buffalo, who was forced to figure out if she was going to take geometry or do drama. both of which are extremely important. So I think, again, it comes back to saying, what is that basket of goods? I think a good place to start. As far as class size and those discussions, those I think are a little bit more on the tweaky side. I think you really come back to saying, fundamentally, what is it we're planning to do? You've
also said that consolidation could be a portion of the solution. It's been discussed for decades, and again, now that you've been here a year, Governor, have you decided that it's now warranted in Wyoming? Have you made that decision?
I think there's real value in having that conversation. As I've traveled the state, I've heard different stories. I can think of Bighorn County, where one of the smaller counties or one of the smaller districts had fought, like the devil to keep their independence, and now recognize that put them maybe at a disadvantage compared to having gone a little bit more in a consolidated mode. I think that's one of the areas that we can really cut down on administrative costs. I think there are some other things we can look at, like, what's the life expectancy of a bus? What are the buildings that we're, requirements we have for buildings, those kinds of things. But I think those are marginal. It really comes back down to what is our expectation for the education system? And once we've established that, then how do we support that? And Craig, I will say this, I think Wyoming's future is really dependent on our education system, not only because of workforce, but mostly because I think one of the best things we can do to be able to attract new business to our state and to be able to grow businesses that are here is having a sticky workforce. There's no better place to educate your kids than in Wyoming, and if you have a family here, they're more sticky.
Last question about education. Are there out-of-the-box alternatives that you've thought about? One viewer asked about educational savings accounts, school vouchers, other things that have been tried in other states. Can that be part of a big solution, or are they really minimal parts of this overall problem with funding?
Yeah, I think Wyoming's, both our constitutional requirement and our low population, I'm not opposed to discussing any of these things, but I think there is a cost benefit to some of them and a dilution factor that happens in some other cases. So I do think that there is the opportunity here to have a robust discussion, not only about what is it we're going to educate, but then how are we going to support that education.
And just one more quick question. You brought up our Constitution. It has been brought up that it needs to be amended to better support Wyoming's future with education. Is that something you subscribe to?
I'd have to see, if some...
Let the voters decide, in other words.
I think that's an absolutely critical issue, a part of it. It's nice to say, as you know, I worked hard to get a constitutional amendment passed. It's not easily done. And you have to, it's not the sort of thing you can just sort of haphazardly say, let's just amend the Constitution. There has to be a good, compelling reason to do it.
We'll see if education meets that standard.
Sure.
On to what it means to have a diversified economy that's been discussed in Wyoming forever. And your policy director, Rennie McKay, said in an interview, I think with the Wyoming Liberty Group, that diversification can't solve our revenue problems for the state. You want to think about vibrant communities, but with our current revenue model, growth in a field that is not energy, it costs the state money. How long is that sustainable, Governor?
Well, this was the issue I think I raised, and it was raised over and over again during the campaign. It's as evident today as it was then. And it started really when we were looking at a couple of businesses that were going to be supported by state investments. And what we discovered was we looked at what our revenue model was, and because so much of our tax revenue comes from the mineral sector, unless that diversification was in the mineral sector, you ended up eating the costs of educating the kids that came here for the workforce, of supporting the industries and the roads and everything else that was there. So it is unsustainable, and that's part of what, again, this Power Wyoming group is meant to do, is to be able to help educate the folks that are interested about what our tax system actually does and does not do.
So let's go right there.
Sure.
It's a planning effort with the initial goal of providing an accurate and comprehensive analysis of Wyoming's future revenue scenarios to citizens and lawmakers. Okay, we're going to have the education piece. What do you envision would be next? And what's your timetable for this?
In terms of how we're going to move the state forward and
Right.
diversify.
We're going to learn
streams.
about the revenue needs. We're going
Right.
to really take a good look at that.
Yeah.
And then we're going to have to make decisions. Do you have a time frame in mind for this?
Yeah, I have, I have 4 years in a term. I would hope that I would get reelected, certainly anticipating doing that, but, time is a valuable commodity. And I think the needs of the state and the crisis that we face, potentially with these declining revenues, doesn't allow us a lot of time to think about it. So I do think that this budget gives us breathing room. I think this next year and the year following are both robust conversations about where is it we're going to make our cuts, how is it we're going to diversify our revenue streams, where are the places that we can emphasize this more, but I'm aggressively pursuing that.
I'd be very interested to see how you're going to lead that discussion, Governor. And I want you to respond to just exactly that. A comment made by Majority Floor Leader of the House, Eric Barley, said the challenge is most folks are willing to cut the programs others use,
Absolutely.
but not their own. So what is your role going to be in this conversation?
I think you have to facilitate that conversation. You have to make sure people understand that we are a state that has a diverse potential economy. It comes back to being honest. I mean, that's this transparency thing that the auditor and I have been working on, that the whole executive branch really is engaged in. We've got to be honest. Last year there was if I remember correctly, there was a poll that said that a majority of people in Wyoming would support raising taxes to support education. And another group came in and said, which is it? Is it property tax or is it sales tax you want to raise? And most people responded, neither one of those. We just want to raise it on the mineral industry, which is, what we typically have done. And I don't think we have that latitude now. So I think we've got to be honest. People in Wyoming, I think, my experience has been they're problem solvers, they're engaged, and if there is an honest discussion, we will come to a conclusion.
Hard conversations, though, for sure.
Very hard. We've done it before, though, Craig. I grew up in this state, and I can remember the 90s, I can remember the 80s.
But things have always bailed us out, Governor.
Absolutely.
Coal bed methane is certainly one of those in your neck of the woods.
Absolutely, absolutely. We had the 2020, Tax 2020 study. John Hines, one of the most conservative legislators, good sheep producer and now cow guy up in Campbell County, said, no, this is my job to carry this. And everybody was ginned up to really talk about that particular plan. And then coal bed methane bailed us out. Maybe that'll happen again, but I guess growing up on a ranch, I always wanted to make sure I had belt and suspenders.
And it's true, I think, that people say less likely now for us to be dependent as much. It brings us to coal, though, Governor, and I want to talk about that if we could, especially as it relates to southwestern Wyoming. Of course, your critics say that Wyoming needs to let go of coal and instead prepare its workers, communities, and tax structure for transition. You also have a substantial number of supporters that want to see if you can deliver on what you call the carbon negative coal solutions. Governor, do we have enough time? Are we going to have enough time to develop those solutions before we lose a town like Kemmerer? And just this week, the Lincoln County treasurer said, I have a very strong concern about whether Lincoln County can survive. Are we running out of time?
I think we are. You don't pivot. I mean, particularly, this is one of the issues we've talked about this year on a national stage with John Barrasso's streamlining the 401 program. We have built a system of regulation which it just slows everything down. It's designed to just drag it out. As a worldwide economy, as a force, we need to make sure that we are much more efficient in how we do that. The research and the work and the experimentation that has to go into making a carbon negative solution, we can't afford to wait, which is why we're all engines forward, working with the Department of Energy, working with the School of Energy Resources, looking at ways to be able to work with Rocky Mountain Power and others to say, where are the places that we can try this, to get it off the ground. It's going to be expensive. A lot of people dismiss it because it is going to be expensive. But we just got to move that forward. And when you think about a couple of factors here, so Craig, during the bomb cyclone a year ago, wind generating facilities, their blades iced up. They lost their lift. They didn't turn. You had coverage on a lot of on the solar panels. It was at that time that coal provided 80% of the power. And as the chairman of Xcel Energy put it to me when I was down in Denver, you know, if we can't provide electricity, people die in those kinds of events. That's not in the national discussion at this point. Coal has a future. It's important that we do it. We can do it better. There's no reason we can't. Now, does that mean we also have to think about transition and what it means for our communities? Absolutely. And there again, we are working extremely hard to figure out if there are new ways that we can diversify economies. You know, I've talked a lot about, which is the low-hanging fruit, tourism and the advantage that tourism brings. Places like Kemmerer are just charming communities. You know, they're beautiful little places set there.
You're still supporting a lodging tax.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm curious of what you view your role in for a community like Kemmerer. That the closure of these power plants would be catastrophic
Absolutely.
to the community. What is your role, and why should the government have a role versus what might happen in the private sector?
Well, I think what is critical to remember about a community like Kemmerer is it is a gem, and it has a population that's there. It has a future because the coal that is mineable there is still viable and important for our trona industry. It's also important because it's nearing the end of its viable life. It isn't hard to imagine the opportunity to sort of repurpose that, either as a battery, which is what some of the renewable folks talk about, or as a way to use gas to generate electricity and ramp up and down as needs are expressed in the grid. And I also think it's a chance to revamp a facility and maybe do stuff. This is what I've talked about for Kemmerer in particular. It's a great place where we can try this new technology, BECS, bioenergy, carbon capture and sequestration. So I think it provides a unique laboratory that maybe other places don't. And I think it's my job to point out, because that's sort of the leader of the state, why it's such a great laboratory.
Again, though, the clock's ticking, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. A question a viewer had that was a little more specific that I want to ask directly. As coal declines and the presence of renewables grows in Wyoming, how can the state best protect its wildlife and its quality of life?
That's exactly the issue that I don't think is being discussed in the national discussion about renewable portfolio standards. We want to have a robust portfolio across all energy sectors. So nothing I'm going to say here says that solar is bad or wind's bad. People are doing quite well with wind and solar, and it is a technology that's viable, more economic, and has an opportunity to be a part of the solution in the future. But if you talk about the landscape scale of what some renewable platforms are going to look like, you really are interfering with wildlife in a way that conventional doesn't. You know, either we have the smaller footprint of a mine and we just mine it better and do a better job, so we're ecologically more benign, or we have a gas field and we can do that much better than we have done in the past. You know, a large-scale, wide array kind of solar, as we saw with the antelope herd, can block those migration routes. So that's one reason why this year I've asked for the legislature to look at expanding our industrial siting to include solar. It already includes wind, and maybe think about expanding that a little bit more so we do have a chance to talk about Wyoming's landscape and our wildlife populations.
I want to turn to another budgetary challenge that's looming, Governor, and that's highway costs. As you well know, the retired General Luke Reiner, the director of the Wyoming Department of Transportation, has talked about $135 million shortfall in a year. Believes that the albatross around the neck is this thing we all drive on I-80. How are we going to fund that budget shortfall in the future? I-80 tolls have been talked about. There's the gas tax that can be used to support and has been in Wyoming to support highway building. How concerned are you that our highways aren't keeping up with the maintenance programs that they'd like?
Well, I am very concerned, and as you point out, 60% of our budget actually goes to I-80. And I think the legislature is looking at a number of ways to sort of address this issue. My conversations with Director Reiner have been kind of along this line. We know that the Highway Trust Fund is having a harder and harder time keeping up with the demand. We know that we can't afford to keep up all our roads. We need to start thinking in priorities about how we're going to maintain these roads and what we're going to do, because people were loath to pass the gas tax. And until somebody, as I've said over and over again, until somebody has said, we've worked all the excess out of the system, they're unwilling to pay more. And so I want to make sure that the roads that are essential for commerce are in the best shape that they can possibly be, and we'll set up a priority system to go through to make sure that we keep the roads that are most essential to Wyoming open if we can't figure out a way to fund these things. And I've heard from people, well, there's nothing wrong with dirt roads, which, I think people may have a different point of view if they live at the end of a dirt road as I do.
I want to get maybe somewhere a little more efficiently or quicker.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But then I think the other aspect of this is, and it's an issue I've brought up with my colleagues from Colorado and New Mexico, both Democrats, who are promoting electric vehicles. They feel that this is a climate solution to drive more electric vehicles. But of course, it doesn't fund our roads. And
no gas taxes paid there.
That's exactly correct. So maybe there's a different framework that we can look at. Maybe there's a way that, some people are doing fees, and then there's a little pushback on fees because why am I being discriminated against with my electric vehicle? So I think there's a national discussion if we want to have robust highways. How are electric vehicles going to be party to that process of keeping them up?
On to the University of Wyoming,
Sure.
Governor, and certainly it's been in the news again with the additional information relative to the dismissal of President Lori Nichols. You're a non-voting member of the Board of Trustees. You said that the decision not to renew Lori Nichols' contract, and I quote, could have been handled better. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think, quite honestly, I think the way that news broke, it sounded like there was information that was being hidden. There was maybe people were not being as forthcoming as they could have been. There was some confusion on the part of President Nichols to why she had been, her contract hadn't been renewed. There was a whole bunch of that sort of went, and sounded like it went bump in the night. My sense, and I think you know this, Craig, is it's better to be more transparent than less. And I would have, as you know, I came into office about the time all of that was happening. I think if it could have been handled better. I think, in retrospect, people might have made different choices. What I'm really focused on, and I want to say this over and over again, President Nichols was good for the university. She did a great job of promoting it around the state. Evidently, from the information, maybe there were some problems, in her own staff. But overall, I think our university has emerged stronger.
So, Governor, really, how can you say that with the succession of presidents that the university has endured?
Well, I say that because there has been a succession of presidents.
Which most people think has weakened, I think, the university.
But here's my point. I think it has given the trustees the challenge of saying, we really have to be thoughtful in how we approach this. As you know, I wrote a letter to the trustees. It wasn't in any way intended to be a slam on the trustees or the process or anything else. It was simply to say, let's get this right. We have a couple of things that are different now. Obviously, our revenue streams are declining a little bit. what are the places that we really want Wyoming to focus on, and what are the leadership skills that we're anticipating. I think we've seen some stepping up in the community, in the university community. And if you remember, when Lori first came on board, there was almost a $40 million cut right away. What could be more disheartening than that? And now you're really talking about more stability and more of a look to the future.
You asked the Board of Trustees to be thorough and transparent several months ago. Is that what they're doing today?
I think they are. I think they are. I'll continue to pursue that frame of reference and say, look, the more we can be transparent, the better off we're going to be. And I think the search process, I think needs to play out.
I want to ask you about an event that happened this fall at the University of Wyoming with the remembrance of the Black 14 governor. And in a little bit of a different context, and just to refresh our viewers' memory, the university apologized to members of the Black 14, members of the Wyoming Cowboy football team that were summarily dismissed by Coach Lloyd Eaton. You're aware that the university apologized, but I want you to ask this question in the context. You're also aware that Governor Stan Hathaway had a very important role in affirming essentially the coach's decision. And I wondered if you've thought about that, the governor's role 50 years ago in the dismissal of the Black 14.
Well, I have, and Craig, I would say a couple of things about it. As I've gone around the state, there's obviously a big diversity of opinions. Some have come to me and said, I was in the state at that time, or I was at the university at that time, and the university did exactly the right thing at that time. And others have come back and said, what a great moment it was to make the apology. And I sort of tend to think it was a good moment to make the apology. I wasn't there for the experience that Stan had. I didn't have a chance to talk to Stan about it. But curiously enough, one of my college roommates, an All-American black athlete, great friend of mine, was talking about sort of the challenges facing black athletes at that time, and his view that it was a tumultuous time in our nation's history. I think that when we recognize these things, it's great. When I had a chance to speak with the Black 14, their expressions were, bygones be bygones. Maybe we did some things that were way out of line too. I think it's a time for us to pause and think about that context of time and our response. And frankly, as I look to our future, I think that it is good that we made that decision.
Governor, I want to bend the discussion just a little bit to Wyoming's community colleges. As you may recall in the debates, I asked the Republican candidates whether all Wyomingites should be taxed to support its community colleges. My thinking there is that even in counties that don't have the community college in their county, benefit from the services those nearby community colleges provide. Your answer was simple, and it was yes.
Yeah.
Is that still a view that you share?
It is a view I share still today, and I will say that about a week ago, I had the president of the university and all the presidents of the various community colleges in my conference room and fed lunch and said, we're too small a state to have all these competing institutions. How can we build a educational platform, collegiate educational platform that benefits our entire state? I still think that that's a critical piece. I've spoken now at a few graduations, and I am absolutely astounded at how many non-traditional students we have. And it makes sense. We're going to work earlier. Times change. We want to go back, get a new certificate, maybe a new degree, make ourselves more employable. But maybe we have a family, and if I'm in Gillette or if I'm in a place like Powell, I can't necessarily commute to Laramie to do that. And so really, how do we provide that overall educational experience that's kind of a all for one and one for all sort of approach?
I think other states have grappled with the issue of should we have a nursing program in our community colleges, or should this community college be the nursing school, and should this community college be the dental hygienist school, and this the welding school? Is there talk about some focus to non-duplicate programs in community colleges?
That was what was interesting about the conversation, but there was a real give and take between presidents saying, how can we make these resources mobile so that perhaps there's a real demand out of Eastern to have more truck drivers or more welders, and that's a phenomenal welding program, but suddenly there's a need for that up in Riverton. How can we move that? The mobile abattoir that Central Wyoming College is putting in place.
Is that a meat lab?
It is a meat
Thank
lab,
you.
yeah.
I learned a new word today. I was guessing.
Well, I go back to Northern was going to have that. It wasn't a meat lab, it was an abattoir. But getting so that we can help our ag industry by being able to process our own beef, those kinds of things. So I was really happy to hear that conversation. Plus, I think in this day and age, there is so much more communication, and with the expansion of broadband and other things, you can start to teach classes more remotely. And it's nice to be able to do that online in your living room, but having that classroom experience and maybe an educator there brings a whole new dimension. So I think we're really looking at new frontiers.
In full disclosure, I'm an employee, as you probably know, of Central Wyoming College, and WyomingPBS is a licensee of Central Wyoming College, and I want to make sure that our viewers understand that. The beauty of this interview, Governor, is we can jump from topic to topic.
Sure.
And we're going to jump to guns right now, which is quite a leap from the University of Wyoming and community colleges. But as you know, Wyoming is one of the 3 states, along with Montana and New Hampshire, that doesn't report disqualifying mental health information to the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. Does that concern you? Would you ever support that? Or are you pleased that Wyoming doesn't participate in that program?
I'm pleased that
Why?
we don't participate in that program because I think Wyoming has had great success so far. I'm not sure that there's a great benefit or value in those reporting standards, and I think Wyoming has got its recipe pretty correct.
So no changes from your administration
Not
along
that
those
I
lines?
would pursue, no.
Any other changes contemplated relative to the issue of firearms in Wyoming, whether it be automatic weapons, large capacity magazines, or any of those types of issues that have crossed your desk?
None of those issues really have crossed my desk, and again, I'm a hunter. My wife's a hunter. I enjoy shooting. I've gone up to do the governor's shooting sports. I think people in Wyoming are comfortable with guns, and so to me, I don't think there's a need to fix something that's not broken.
On to Medicaid expansion.
Okay.
And we'll
Fun
talk
topics.
about healthcare too. Sure, but important. As you know, that there's a lot of discussion on whether and exactly how Medicaid expansion might benefit 19,000 or so Wyomingites who either can't afford insurance in their pools or for whatever reason don't have insurance. And it's an issue that you've said would be willing to, I think, listen to, not wanting to put words in your mouth. It also has been passed now out of the Joint Revenue Committee on an 8-5 vote to maybe allow you to, if it were to pass the legislature, expand Medicaid coverage in Wyoming. What are your thoughts, Governor, on this? What more information could you possibly need to go forward with this? It's been talked about for so many years.
Sure. Well, there are a couple things that concern me. And again, eyes wide open, what is it we're hoping to accomplish and what's it going to cost? I do think that there's a study that we did that was authorized by Senator Scott last year. It came back with sort of incomplete data. We've asked it to be refined a little bit more, just to understand where we're going. And then over this whole thing is the case in the Supreme Court potentially about whether the ACA is actually constitutional or not. And so, again, eyes wide open, what is it we're getting ourselves into? And if it doesn't work out exactly as everybody's planned, what are the costs going to be for the people of Wyoming? I do think, and I've said this before, that this is a huge issue for the state. It is a huge issue for our medical community. It's a huge issue for the residents of Wyoming. We are blessed in that we have such a small population. It gives us some maybe advantage over larger states to be able to pursue maybe more private options. Don't know exactly what those would be. I'd like to work with the legislature to find out how that goes. You know, I've talked a lot to Senator Enzi, who's obviously spent a long time working on this issue, about what are the refinements that can be done in the national picture that might advantage Wyoming differently. You know, right now, because we're such a small population, we only have one insurer, and then that's problematic. But is there something the state can do that makes a difference?
Two questions about that. One, are you at all convinced that this would be a huge way for rural hospitals to be more viable? Or do you have questions on whether Medicaid expansion would make our rural hospitals, our smaller hospitals in Wyoming, closer to communities, viable?
What I'm worried about, Craig, is it's a way of papering over the costs. We know the costs are high. And we know because we're a small population that's remote and we're getting eaten away at from our boundaries, that we have fewer and fewer rural hospitals that are independent, and so we're shipping more and more people out of state. Like to see that trend reversed. It is a way of covering those costs, there's no question about it. But if you've looked at the escalating costs of healthcare, how long, this is my issue, how long is it going to be viable for them, or are there different models we need to look at to make sure that we have a good, accessible, cost-effective healthcare solution in Wyoming?
We had more viewer questions about healthcare and Medicaid expansion
Absolutely.
than any other topic. But many of them essentially said this: Wyoming has been looking at this for 7 years now, putting it off because we want a Wyoming solution to the healthcare problems, which there isn't one yet. You've mentioned some different ideas that you have. How serious will your administration make this a topic? And how much of it, again, we go back to this timeline, can we afford to wait to discover what this Wyoming solution that we all want is?
Well, look, Craig, I got elected to be governor, not to sort of sit in office and try to figure out how to be popular. And so from my standpoint, this is a solution we've got to deal with. But a lot of it's in the legislature's hands. You know, we'll see what happens this session. We'll see if there are some practical opportunities that we can prosecute and move forward on. I'm dedicated to trying to find a solution. I said that before, and I think that's my job.
On to another issue relative to Southwest Wyoming in Uinta County, and this is the ICE detention facility that has been discussed really statewide. To summarize, your position is that it's a local decision as to whether this detention facility is ultimately built in Uinta County. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that is a hit on the head. I was on the State Loan and Investment Board, the State Board of Land Commissioners more appropriately, as treasurer when former Attorney General Michaels pointed out that we don't really have a role to play at a state level. Now, I know others have thought that's not the case.
Yeah, the question becomes, what would the state's role be in oversight once this thing is operating and functional? Would there be a role for your office?
Well, I don't believe there would be. I think that particular decision parsed the question pretty carefully.
Okay, we'll move on. In your budget, you requested $20 million or $1,000 per year per employee to support employee compensation, not permanent raises, but again, to support Wyoming's state employees. You noted that the state is risking in losing its best employees to competition, a trend that's we're beginning to experience. Can you expand on that? What are you seeing relative to wages paid to Wyoming state employees and this trend that you talk about?
Well, we're not competitive when we want to hire quality employees into the state. And in fact, what we end up doing is, I'll take the Wyoming State Penitentiary, for example. We are training constantly new people now. Luckily, Director Lampert has been able to raise the
We're going to talk about the prison next, so a lot to talk about
sure.
there.
But the point is that these are people that come in, get their certificates, their education, their training, and then find much more competitive jobs out of state. I saw that in the treasurer's office, where some of our best employees would be picked off either by towns, which pay more than the state, or out of state. We're close to Colorado, and so quality would tend to look for a better wage. They should. That's what they should do. But the problem, and Director Reiner can tell you this too, the problem comes with snowplow drivers and things like that. If we don't recognize the effort and the work and the loyalty of our employees, we risk losing them. And the cost associated with continually trying to train replacements is probably more in the end than it is to just compensate appropriately. The other reason I would mention this is that our employees have gone through a series of shocks over the last couple of years. Big question on retirement. How much does an employee have to put in with the retirement system? Healthcare is the other. Those were two things that were kind of a shock. You give a raise and then you take it away. That's something we need to recognize.
A little more from a macro perspective, is Wyoming right-sized in the number of state employees it has, in your mind?
My concern is this. I think that a large part of our business activity in Wyoming is related in some fashion to government. I'd like to see a much more robust private sector. Part of the discussion that we're talking about, kind of making transparent is, okay, healthcare. If we cut healthcare budget, what is the full picture of that, and what are the services we're not going to have? Does that mean that we cut healthcare and that means we can't afford to support senior centers? Obviously, that's not something we want to do. But those are the questions I think people in Wyoming need to understand.
Again, back to Power Wyoming and prioritizing a lot of those things.
Absolutely.
You mentioned prisons. The last data that I've seen is Wyoming's prison enrollment is still growing just a little bit. Fiscal year 19 is the last data that I've seen. 2,525 average daily population for Wyoming Department of Correction inmates, up about 2% from fiscal year 18. The question is, and you've heard you talked about staffing issues from the director. He said that the safety at these facilities is somewhat jeopardized. And I wonder if you share that view. And then the follow-up to that is it your goal to reduce the number of people in Wyoming's prisons? How do you go about that?
Corrections is not something I've studied a tremendous amount about, and I've learned a lot over the course of the year. I would like to see, if we can reduce the numbers of prisoners we have. There are people that may have lighter sentences. There may be ways that we can do a better job of meeting the needs of some of our prisoners. I am not interested in releasing people wholesale. I mean, that
You watched the governor of Oklahoma do that.
Yeah, I've watched. Well, the governor of Oklahoma versus the governor of Kentucky, know both of them. The governor of Oklahoma released a number of light offending drug-related kinds of things with support, mental health support and other community assets that would help to keep those people on track. The governor of Kentucky did something else, and obviously Governor Stitt of Oklahoma was fairly successful, seems to be, at least over time. Governor of Kentucky caused a lot of concern.
Yeah. Have you had commutation or other pardon requests come across your desk, Governor, and how do you handle those?
Well, they've just started to come, and I'd say they run a range. A young man I grew up with in KC married a gal who unfortunately got caught, with somebody who was selling cocaine, convicted of a felony. She's been a very productive member of the community for a long period of time, still a felon. This isn't really commutation as much as it is expungement, but the Crest got a great family, really got their life together. What does that mean versus, maybe some of the more serious crimes? I had the occasion to visit with former Governor Sullivan, Of course, Mark Hopkins had to really ponder that, actually agonize over it,
Sure.
The execution. And I'm still coming to grips with that. I guess when you're governor, and that power rests with you, you need to think about it carefully. So I've prayed a lot.
Tough issue, I bet.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask you about the state Republican Party. What's your role in leading Wyoming Republicans? And I ask that in the context of what we've read in the news about the Natrona County's GOP chairman, Joe McGinley's accusation that he's been investigated by the state Republican Party. What do you view your role as Wyoming's top Republican?
Well, I think there is a leadership role. It's a role that I committed to. When I first got elected, I've talked to some of the officers. I've expressed my concerns. I come from a Republican tradition that was a big tent tradition. It was one, and I feel very strongly about this. It's about. It's about leadership. It's about having a better idea. It's about showing that government doesn't solve all problems. That personal initiative, responsibility, small government closest to the people. Those are the things that are essential in the Republican framework.
Are you concerned that the state's method, the state GOP's method of expressing leadership, is very concerning to you?
Well, yeah, I think, my concern is once you stray from, here's what the ideal is to we're going to enforce our particular point of view. I think that is hard to, it's not as much a big tent kind of thing. It's sort of like, this is my club and you can't be in it. And I think that's problematic. I think it'll be problematic until, and that's really the reason the role I play, I think, is to be able to demonstrate what effective conservative leadership means. And so that's really where I've focused my attention.
The Wyoming Department of Agriculture has submitted the state's plan to regulate the hemp industry in Wyoming. And I'm curious, Governor, how big of an impact do you think the hemp industry ultimately is going to have in Wyoming?
Well, the hemp industry, I think, has been, it will add to our economy. I'm not sure exactly how much yet, but if we can bring some processing to the state, that'll add jobs. It's part of the diversification. And I think to give our ag producers another crop to produce, I think is going to be critical. I'm disappointed that it's taken us this long. As you know, we passed the law last year, really pushed to try to get our rules in place. The Ag Department got their rules submitted to the Department of Agriculture. I spoke to Sonny Perdue this summer on a ride through the basin, and we expressed our concern that we get this done as quickly as possible. We got it back this fall, and lo and behold, there's more aspects to the regulation, and Attorney General had to look at that. It's taken us too long. But we're, I believe, going to be ready for the spring. I think it's going to be great for some producers that want to take that leap, and I'm looking forward to seeing what it'll mean for our economy.
To another topic, Governor, there's been discussion that the Select Committee on Tribal Relations might be elevated to become a full standing committee of the Wyoming legislature. What's your input about that?
I think the legislature, probably that committee needs to be able to bring bills, and I think that's one of the reasons why it needs to be, or why they believe it needs to be elevated. I think our tribal relations, we have the Eastern Shoshone and the Northern Arapaho that we work with currently in state. I have tribal liaisons in both of those cases. I've also had conversations with A.J. Not Afraid, chairman of the Crow Tribe, and now we have the Navajo Transitional Energy Authority. The Shoshone Bannock have come in and talked about how they do hunting in Idaho. It seems like we're really needing to have a bigger presence with a more robust tribal relations. If that committee can help, that's great. I think in our office, we're also going to try to elevate that post.
Well, Governor, it's been a pleasure to visit with you. You're about to give your second State of the State address. Are you going to tell the citizens of Wyoming that the state is strong?
Yeah, I think that the state is very strong, and that is the message that I'm going to give. Obviously, we've talked a lot about the concerns we have going forward. But Craig, let me leave you with a very brief story that we all know about this summer and why I think this state is better positioned than so many others. And that's the Goshen Irrigation District. July 1st, collapse of a 100-year-old tunnel blew out the side of the reservoir or of the canal. 110,000 acres that were at risk at that point, Nebraska and Wyoming. A lot of people might have just sort of given up the ghost and said, this can't work. We in Wyoming, the day we arrived, they already had equipment there. They were already working on it. We're trying to figure out how to pay for it. Gov, best thing you could do is see if you could get on the horn with the governor in Nebraska. Called Ricketts. Governor Ricketts says, we're standing shoulder to shoulder. We're underwater here because it was a big flood season, but we know how important that is to communities that rely on sugar production and everything else. So the people of Wyoming are can-do people. They're problem solvers, and so my view is, when you have a population like that, we'll make it through.
Governor, it's a pleasure to visit with you as always. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Hopefully, maybe we can get together at the end of the legislative session and see how things worked out.
I would love that.
Thank you for joining us
Thank
on
you.
Capital Outlook.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the BNSF Railway Foundation, dedicated to improving the general welfare and quality of life in communities throughout the BNSF Railway service area. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
And in part by the Wyoming Public Television Endowment and viewers like you.